Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ronan Gillespie. I'm an independent business development consultant specializing in creating a route to market here in the EU and establishing distribution networks. I've been in the drinks industry for nearly 30 years. I started my career with Jameson Irish Whiskey. When I joined Jameson in the early 1990s, Jameson sold less than 500,000 cases worldwide. It's now a 7 million case brand. We set ourselves the objective back then of being the best-selling whiskey in the world, which seemed kind of an unattainable goal back in the 90s. But now that's very much within Pernod Ricard's kind of sight at the moment. I spent 16 years selling Jameson around the world, and then in 2007 I set up my own business development consultancy, Next Step International. One of my clients, Kerrygold, asked me to join them full-time in 2014 to establish a business unit for Kerrygold Irish Cream Liqueur, which I launched for them here in Germany and in the US. Stayed with them for 2 years and then went back to doing what I like best, which is working for myself. You'll see some of my current clients there. O.Z. Tyler Kentucky Bourbon Whiskey. That's great tasting Kentucky Bourbon Whiskey, which mixes traditional ways of making whiskey with innovation. I represent Luxardo, Italian liqueurs in Ireland, and I do some work for the Temple Bar Irish Whiskey and for an Israeli craft beer called Chevet. And you'll see on the other side some of my past clients. I've many past clients, but I've done some work for Malfy Gin, for Nika Whiskey, for the Irishman Irish Whiskey, and for Oops wine from Chile. Setting up route to market is a means to an end, and that end is brand building. That's ultimately what you want to do. So here are some of kind of, just as a brief aside, some of my observations over the years in terms of key success factors for brand building. Now, I'm not talking about the brand name here or packaging or all those good things, but for me, 5 key success factors are that it needs to taste great, and that probably goes without saying, but you would be surprised that people do come to market with products that don't taste great. Remember, through our marketing efforts, we can convince someone to buy 1 bottle of whatever it is we're selling, but it's only if it tastes great will the consumer come back and buy a 2nd bottle, so it needs to taste great. Secondly, you need to be able to explain to consumers why it tastes great. You need to have an easy to articulate unique selling point. Not just that you can talk to consumers about it, but that they can talk to their family, their friends, and their followers about it, that they can pass on that message. Third issue is a compelling brand story, the heritage piece. Why does this brand exist? Fourthly, some investment. Consumers in this business, in the spirits business, they get very emotionally engaged with their brand. So if you're asking them to add a new brand to their repertoire, you are going to have to invest in that. You can't launch a cash cow. And lastly, patience. I referred to Jameson earlier. Jameson is it's an overnight success story that took 20 years. So there's no quick wins in this business. In terms of what we're here today to talk about, creation of route to market, for me it's a 3-stage process. And the first stage is the strategy. It's identifying the most attractive markets for your brand. The second stage is the hard work, the importer search and selection piece. And then the third stage is working with that importer or distributor. And I'm going to use the words importer and distributor as the same thing, because as Harry said, in the EU, it's not a 3-tier system. You can find a distributor in a country, they can distribute, they can sell to off-premise, on-premise, etc. And often they'll call themselves an importer, even though technically under EU law they're a distributor. So you want to develop and grow that business over time. Don't just look at the biggest market for your brand in Europe, because the big market might be in decline. There might be smaller markets which are in growth. These kind of criteria that I'm putting up here, you should take them all into account. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but do take them all into account and maybe put a weighting beside them. The whole objective here is really to look at the markets and your importer search and selection as objectively as possible, and then maybe overlay some subjectivity over it. So take into account the market growth rates. There could be some barriers to entry. Harry mentioned a few moments ago the labeling that you might have for a specific country. That might be something that makes it awkward for you to go into that market. But if you take all of these issues into account, all of these criteria into account, you should then focus on one or two markets, in my opinion. There are 50 countries in Europe, 28 of which are in the European Union. Don't try and do them all at one time. If you'll spread yourself too thinly, try and focus on one or two markets. So after this kind of exercise, you'll be left with, one or two lead markets. And for today, I'm just going to say, suppose that's Germany, where we are today. Then you need to put together a long list of potential distributors. Now, here's a smattering of distributors, a handful. There are dozens more in Germany. From that long list, you want to get it down to a short list of the companies that you want to approach, okay? And some of the things that you have to ask yourself in advance of making those approaches are, what kind of business model do you want to pursue? Now, if you're a big brand and you've got deep pockets, you can try and do everything in-house. You can do all the front office stuff like sales, marketing, business development, and the back office stuff like compliance, invoicing, warehousing, logistics. You can do that all yourself and interface with a distributor. You might go and look for a distributor that operates in more than one EU country. There are distributors who will tell you that they operate all over Europe, but usually there might be clusters. So you might have Germany, Austria, Switzerland together. You could have the Nordics and the Baltics together. Or you might find a distributor that works in France, Italy, Spain and Portugal, for example. Now there's pluses to that. It means you only have one point of contact, one invoicing entity, one shipment destination. But the more services a distributor provides for you, the more margin they're going to want to take, and that's going to squeeze your margin. So you have to weigh up the pros and cons, etc. Or another option would be to play to your strengths. Listen, nobody is as passionate about your brand as you are, and nobody knows as much about your brand as you do. But you can't be good at everything. So maybe what you want to do is manage the front office yourself, the sales, marketing, distribution, directly with distributors, and outsource all the back office stuff to a business like our hosts here today, Park Street, who will do compliance, logistics, warehousing, invoicing, etc. And that could be a really good way to do it. As I say, some of the criteria you need to take into account, and you will have to ask each and every distributor their margin requirements, what they feel the retailer or the on-premise margin requirements will be. And that will, depending on the services that you get from the distributor, your margin will therefore be squeezed if you want to remain competitive in the marketplace. Most distributors will tell you that they're great at execution and planning. Let them demonstrate that to you. Make sure that they show you what they've done on other brands. Cultural fit. Are you going to get on with these people? I suppose what I've tried to do here is make everything as objective as possible, but there has to be some subjectivity. Do you get on with them today when you're talking to them? But what do you think it might look like in 3 years' time? What's it going to look like when there's a problem? Because there will always be problems, delayed shipments or orders not complete, etc., etc. So how are you going to get on with them then? And then the last thing to take into account, I suppose, is that getting the first order from a new distributor in the EU, that's a moment of celebration, and it's something that you should be really proud of when you get your first order. But it's far more important to get the second order and the third order and the fourth order, because that's repeat business, and that's ultimately what's your medium and long-term future. So here's a list of things that, again, the criteria you should take into account in terms of ongoing business development with your distribution partner. The top one there is share of mind. If you're 2% of a distributor's turnover, you need to be about 5% of their activity, okay? You need them working harder for your brand than they are for other brands in their portfolio. And how are you going to do that? Well, you can incentivize them through extra margin, something like that. You need to build a long-term relationship with them and build it quickly. Clear communication is important. Let them know what your expectations are, but also ask them what their expectations of you are. And you'll see some other criteria there. Let them know what's happening in other markets, best practice sharing, etc. You mightn't have enough budget to do some consumer insight, but make sure that when you come to the market, wherever it is in Europe, that you talk to bartenders and feed all of that kind of stuff back into your distributor, because you might get some insight from bartenders that they won't get. So in summary, as I say, for me, route to market strategy is a three-stage process. You need to do your homework. That's the strategic planning in terms of choosing one or two very attractive markets for you. Not necessarily the biggest, but the most attractive to you. You have your importer search and selection piece. And then once you've chosen that partner and you have the right partner, then you need to build the business over time through that partner. Okay, thank you very much.